Hey folks, Steve here with a special video for you today. We're going to kickstart our new playthrough series on Korea, Fire and Ice, a game that was published by Compass Games and designed by Adam Starkweather. This is one that I have had for quite some time. This was actually gifted to me by a friend who had the game for a while, decided he wasn't as interested in it, and he gave it away because he heard I was interested in it. So it sat unplayed for a very long time until just recently I punched the counters, and obviously we are set to cover the game. So um, this will be our sort of introduction as usual for a new game and a new game series. Just some background context for the game itself. This is the first game in the operational scale system, OSS, and I've got another game off to the side here I'll put on screen in a second, but this is the first game in that series, and so since this game has come out, there was a second game in the series, which is Vietnam Rumor of War, which I also have and have not quite played. And now Adam has had a few more published, or a few more are about to be published. I'm kind of not 100% sure where some of this is. I know he has a sort of hypothetical Third World War set that are coming out, and more in that vein to come. And then I believe there is another one set in the Middle East. I have to go look at the details for that. I'll correct my speech here in another clip of this video that you're watching, so we'll fix that. But this one was the first one, so it kind of has some, if it's the first game in the series, there's going to be some maybe some issues to work out and things to address. And just straight off the bat, so that folks understand, I am playing this game now several years after it was originally published. The game has received various errata and, in fact, received a rules rewrite to the 3.0A rule set. So if you go out to the Compass Games website, you go to the game page for this, you will find a PDF that is like the 3.0 rules. If you're going to be following along or looking at the game, I really recommend you look at that rule set, as that's kind of the actual rule set that should be used for the game, and not the rule book that came with the game. There's a lot that's kind of been fixed up between that published rulebook and the 3.0. Not to say there's not value in having the original rulebook. It does have pictures and the examples of play that you can look at the pictures for and kind of understand how the game works. It's still kind of valuable to look at it for that reason. But I will be using the updated rules. And just to kind of show you the extent that I went into prepping for this, I did get a enhanced sequence of play from the 3.0 rules printed out as a separate thing, so I can reference this as our true sequence of play. And I did get the 3.0 rules printed at the UPS store so that I could reference the rules in a physical format. It's a bummer they didn't have the spiral bound, so I had to make do with the cone bound, but whatever. It's good enough. It cost me like $10, 10, $11. So it's all, black and white, but there really aren't any pictures in this version of the rules, and is pretty straightforward. You will find that if you compare the rules, that these 3.0 rules are much better. Much better in terms of getting you to understand kind of the way the game is supposed to work. Now, I'm going to also point out right off the bat that there is some errata that should be in a 3.1 version of these rules that has not yet made it and is currently only visible if you look at ComSim World or a Board Game Geek post where I had to ask a very specific question. And it ultimately comes down to this chart. I'm going to bring it up on the camera so you guys can see it just as soon as I find it again. And of course I'm not going to find it as fast as I want it at all. Okay, so on this page of the rules, which would be page 14, there's this chart that talks about if something then. that there was some kind of miscommunication here where this chart seems to imply that you only lose tank support or artillery support if you're a US or UN minor unit and you retreated 2 or more hexes. That is actually incorrect. And so this table kind of needs reconfigured a little bit because it sort of got confused with the enters or passes through enemy Zoc, then you do this, so that if retreating US or UN minor unit really only applies to this first case, and then these cases down here, even though it says UN tank support and UN artillery support, these 2 cases apply to the communists as well. And that confused a lot of folks when the rewritten rules came out, where it seemed like you could not lose tank or artillery support at all. And that's not the case. You definitely can. It's just the rules, when they were rewritten and reformatted, they got pretty much everything else much, much, much better, but they somehow skipped over that. So basically, and I'll mention this when I'm playing the game, if a unit retreats 2 or 3 hexes and they become disrupted or routed, if they used artillery and tank support, then they will lose 1 to 2 levels of that type of support. And we'll get into what is artillery support and what is tank support in the game to come, and as we play through the videos. But just know that is one kind of, to me, kind of critical piece of errata that is not totally formatted into a PDF yet. But I think that's the only real major piece of errata for those 3.0 rules. So there's a few other things that I marked up on my player aid sheets, which you guys will see as I go through the series. A couple of minor errata edits on some player aid charts, all very minor stuff. So I'm hoping now I'm going to be playing with the cohesive thing. If you look back at some of the early comments in this game, way back, there's a lot of unhappiness with the way certain things were set up, and the rules were a mess, and all of that. This playthrough series, and ultimately when I get to the review, will be based on what is the game experience now, based on the latest rules, based on the game experience as I have it. But obviously, if you're watching this now, you are going to know that there is some challenging bits here, some things, some growing pains that this game had to have before we could actually get into the game as you're watching it be played. But at least it's at the point it's at now. As it happens, of these 2 games here, Korea and Vietnam, obviously they're really interesting topics for the Cold War and distinct conflicts in Asia that are pretty cool to check out. As it stands for me, I am much more like, I'm going to show my bias here, and so folks understand, I am much more forgiving for Korea and any mistakes it has right now, or issues or whatever, because it is the first game in the series. It is portraying pretty much conventional forces versus conventional forces, and so the whole operation of movement and HQs, combat, support, all of it, across the 2 sides is more symmetrical than asymmetrical, with the balance being, the Allies, the UN forces are going to have better air support ultimately. Vietnam, I am less forgiving for, and I'll just say, this being the first video on the whole operational scale series, period, that some of what I think Vietnam does, I'm not so sure about, and until I play it, I'm very skeptical. So it'll be interesting to see where my opinion lies much later when I've played both of these, to say, which one met expectations, which one failed, or how did they fail or exceed? Because again, I think Korea should have a pretty smooth play experience now. I kind of know what I'm getting into here. I think I've actually cheated a little bit. I have played around with this game on Vassal a little bit, and this was like a year and a half ago when I did it, so I'm pretty fuzzy on it. Whereas Vietnam, I've definitely looked at quite a bit, and there's certain mechanics that if you only read about and you're only seeing from the outside in, you really can't be sure how it actually all plays on the table, and if issues are really issues or if they're just phantoms. So that's going to be a part of the experience of playing through these games. I'm not yet sure if I'll get another game in the series of the operational scale system series, OSS, but at least I have these 2, and that's a good place to start. and of course, starting with the first one should give us an interesting gameplay experience. Um, okay, so obviously, the game's not set up yet, so we can't start playing, but we can start looking at a couple of other things in this introductory video to kind of get folks situated. So let me get the maps out and set those up, and we'll kind of get a feeling for where we're at with things. Okay, so here is the map, 3 maps all set up, managing to fit on my table configuration here. We will not play the game at this angle, but I did want to show you guys the whole map from this angle, just so you can kind of appreciate the size that we're talking about here. These are 3 standard maps, all lined up, and you can see it runs what we would consider South Korea, North Korea, and then parts of China are on the map. There's sort of that gray area up there, the really non-playable area. So we are sticking to basically North Korea. So this game is on the, I probably should have said this right away. Obviously, this game is on the Korean War and covers, the active part of the war that really most war games on the topic cover, right? You don't really see much in the way of Korean war games covering sort of the stalemate around the parallel and a couple of years of not a whole lot, other than offensives that don't go necessarily very far, right? So the active maneuvering part of the war is what the game covers, like many others, and so the general progression of the game will probably be, if it sticks to the historical narrative, the North Koreans invading South Korea across the border, driving down through the capital, getting to the Pusan perimeter, which is outlined by this sort of white, let's see, this white outline here you can see is marked out. Before the U.S. UN forces can help support the South Koreans, in which case then you see basically a whole push back north all the way up, which eventually leads to Chinese intervention and a surge all the way back down, and we end up almost right where we began again, right? So obviously both sides can try to play in a way that keeps the resurgence of one side occurring, right? If the North Koreans push all the way down here and they get to Pusan and capture that port and everything else, then I would call we'd call that a communist victory. And I don't think there's an instant win condition for the U.S. UN South Korean forces. I don't think that's the case. Even if they get up to the border of China, I'll have to double check the rules there. But there's those kind of restrictions. Now I am going to put plexi on the map. You can see it's still fluffy in a couple of places, poochy. We'll put some plexi on that. Hopefully the lights won't create too much of an issue there, but that's what we'll be taking a look at. I'll probably keep the video to a angle like this. But if you can't tell, I am using a different recording device. I'm using a phone to record this now. My video camera is just garbage, and the lighting is a huge problem. Where my phone, even in the lighting that the room has always been at, records much better, and I think the picture is looking much better. We'll see what it does with the file size and everything else, but I will be able to use the stand to kind of put the camera on the map, on the table, at certain important areas as we need to take a look at it. So that's the game plan for that. Now, I should speak to the overall structure of the OSS system. So it's certainly trying to achieve a situation where it is not very counter dense. There won't be a huge amount of counters on the map at any given time. The mechanics will be relatively straightforward, though its combat mechanics are unique. We'll talk to that. But there's a lot abstracted, and that's going to be an interesting kind of comparison. Just how abstracted are we talking about? Well, there aren't any tank or mechanized counters on the map. there are no artillery counters on the map. So things like artillery and tanks are handled via a support track. So what that really looks like as a comparison is, let's say here's the United Nations player aid, where you can see there's a track, replacements, infrastructure, supply track, and a support level track. You'll have a marker for both artillery and tank, and you can see there's a maximum that you can have for any given category. That tank support or artillery support are on this track. You can have such a number, and then depending on the terrain that you're using, the type of attack that's being conducted, that value will be computed into an attack bonus for a combat. And as I mentioned, there are ways to lose support levels because you lose in a fight, maybe badly, with in a combat where you use those assets. So it's not like, you have an infinite amount of tank support anywhere and everywhere. There is a choice that a player has to make. Am I going to use my tank support in this combat, and am I willing to put them at risk and suffer the consequences of using them? And I'll say off the bat that that's very different from many games where you do have distinct counters that are armor or mechanized forces or whatever. Here it is much more abstract, and so we'll see. I mean, I like the idea of having specific counters representing very specific forces. The intent of the game design is to try to get away from a very meticulous game mechanic, I guess, is maybe one way to look at it. And I don't want to put words in Adam's mouth, but it is certainly set up, or seems to be set up, to kind of free up the player to focus on the position of forces, and sort of an operational movement of forces as a concentration, not a operational movement of specific forces in a specific way, I guess. I don't know. I'm probably not saying that right. But you'll understand when you take a look at some of the actual combat counters. So as we look at, say, this unit, this guy has no combat factors on him. Nothing on the back either. And in fact, there's not a reduced value when it comes to combat units. You simply have a combat unit or you don't have a combat unit in a given hex. And what that really is going to boil down to, well, I guess there are HQs as well, and you're going to have units that are near their HQs, that it's about getting your units in a position where attacking will be beneficial against terrain. You still care about a ratio of forces, so having more of your units involved in a combat than the defender will provide bonuses as well, kind of like, you'd rather have 3 or 4 to 1 odds than 2 to 1 odds or 1 to 1 odds in a typical game. And of course, air has a pretty significant impact on the game as well. And this game actually has a pretty interesting air component to it. So you can see this is the UN air display. You're going to have a bunch of different aircraft that are based out of different airfields, and can perform different types of missions, strategic missions, tactical missions. And you can see, things like airfield strikes, infrastructure striking, providing ground support. The ground support ends up being added up to a support track for combats, just like artillery and tank support. And of course, they have to get there. So you will have some MiG-Ally interaction. You will have fighters trying to gain air superiority. And it reminds me a little bit, and I'm sure there's some, all games are kind of looking at different systems from one way or another. Reminds me a little bit of the air system in Next War, the Next War series. It also reminds me of the Third World War series, where you have some air assets that can be set to different theaters and different types of missions, and then you adjudicate how that all plays out. So it'll be interesting to see how that mechanic also plays in terms of the Air Force of the Allies. I keep saying Allies, but I really mean to say the UN and U.S. South Korean forces. Compared to the communists, there's going to be an imbalance there, and how does that all shake out in terms of the actual gameplay? Not a lot has been done to cover this game, other than a few scattered videos, a few scattered posts and different things. So I don't know what to truly expect out of the game experience. So it's going to be very exploratory for me as I try to play through and kind of understand the do's and don'ts, and I'll probably make some errors in judgment of strategy. Hopefully, my rules play will be pretty solid. I've tried to do as much research as I can before this on the game mechanics to make sure I kind of get how it works, but I can't promise perfection, unfortunately. So I think that's all I want to say for the intro here, guys. I am going to be looking to do the full campaign scenario, so there's a distinction between the different scenarios. You can start with Chinese intervention, for instance. You can do a couple different ones. I'm going to do the campaign game. I want to see how the game tracks across the whole game experience. Um, well, I guess one thing I should point out in terms of, let's see if I can figure out how to get this on camera. You can see there's a turn track over here, and really what it is turns are going to vary from being 1 week long. So here, each month, 4 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4 turns for July 1950. But then it can shorten to 2 weeks per a turn, or 4 weeks for a turn, and then the winter months. So the game isn't just weekly turns across a year's time or whatever. It kind of shrinks and expands, and so what you're going to end up having are those winter turns will have some winter mechanics, but they're not around very long before we get back to the rest of the action. So there you go. We'll take a closer look at all the different mechanics as we play through. But I wanted to give you guys the sort of intro as we start getting rolling here into the new series. When I'm done with this, I may want to jump right into Vietnam Rumor of War just to keep pushing on the system and see how much I like it. I will say that I got the Deadly Woods in the mail, and I really want to play that at some point soon. So there's going to be some competition in terms of what I want to play, but we'll give it a roll. So yeah, we'll take care of it, guys. So the next video will be some of the setup, and we'll talk through the setup and potentially start playing turn one and play through the mechanics. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the improved video quality. I hope it's good. I got to render the video all into one video and post it, so we'll have to see what that looks like. But let me know what you think, and if this is going to be a better system for recording, we'll stick with it. If it's better quality, better audio, all that good stuff, we'll check it out. So here you go, guys. Korea, Fire and Ice, introduction, start of a new series. We'll see how it goes. Take care. Keep gaming.